Well, thank you, Osvaldo, Miguel, and the rest of the U.S. wheat team there in Santiago. My pleasure to be here with the Chilean team and with the Chilean customers. What we're going to talk about today is the futures market and risk management. In simple terms, how can buyers and sellers of wheat protect themselves from price movement, from high prices and market volatility? So let me get over and make sure I can share my screen and get the presentation up correctly. And Osvaldo, are you make sure that you're seeing my presentation on your screen? Is it correct? Okay.
I can see it.
Full screen is good?
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll move along then. Well, the title of the presentation, as you can see, is Why Have Futures Markets and What Are They Good For? Well, to start off, it's pretty simple. It's obvious to state that none of us can predict the future. That's one thing that we cannot do. Not only for next year or even next month, next week, and in these type of markets, we can't even predict what the market will do tomorrow. We're in very volatile times. So because we can't predict the future, because we cannot truly know with any degree of surety where prices are going to go, how do we protect ourselves? How do we buy grain? How do we buy wheat? When do we know when to buy it? How to buy it? How to protect our price risk? So as you can see in this chart, there's the famous crystal ball sitting on the desk, but you'll see that the crystal ball is empty. It is clear. You can see straight through to the gentleman's shirt. So it's obvious that none of us can predict the future, and particularly in these types of markets. So we have something called the futures market. The Chicago Board of Trade, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, as well as others, and we're going to look at some of those others as we go through the presentation. But we have futures exchanges, and we ask the question, what purpose do they serve? And the answer to that is they serve two primary purposes. One is price discovery. So everybody in the world, not just here in the United States, but everybody around the world can turn on their computer, go to www.cmegroup.com, and you can look at the commodity prices for wheat, for corn, for soybeans, and for other commodities. So price discovery, you can turn on your computer, you can view the price of wheat today in Chicago, or if you're looking at the hard red winter wheat futures in the Kansas City futures month, also displayed, also represented in the Chicago Board of Trade webpage. Now, of course, that is the relative price today in the physical location of Chicago or Kansas City in the United States. But it's a point of reference. And of course, the theory, and indeed largely the practice, is that as that price in Chicago goes up and down, as it fluctuates in price, so will the price delivered to your market in Chile, your market in Europe, your market in Asia. Everything has a relationship, or as we will talk about later, a correlation to that Chicago point of reference. So it's rather simple. rather easy for everybody to look at the futures market on the internet, on that Chicago webpage, and you can get price discovery for how prices are moving in Chicago, and it will give you some point of reference as to whether or not prices are rising or falling in the market that you are interested in the market that you are buying and purchasing your wheat cargoes. The other purpose that the Chicago futures market serves, Chicago and Kansas City, is the risk management. So there is the opportunity to do what we call hedging. And we're going to talk about that as we move forward in this market. But there is an opportunity for buyers around the world to purchase futures if they believe the market is going to go up and they're not ready to pull the trigger. They're not ready to purchase their physical cargo yet. Let's say you want to buy wheat for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months forward. Well, you may not be ready to lock in a physical contract, but you may be nervous or concerned that the price is going to appreciate. It's going to go up. You can buy futures as a hedge and lock in at least a good portion of your price risk. Likewise, if you're afraid that the market you need to buy, but you also think, well, my timing may not be perfect. What if I purchase today and the market goes down later? You can also use the futures market to offset that risk. So it's important to know those two purposes, those two key elements of the futures market: price discovery and the opportunity to use it as a risk management tool. And again, that's what we will talk about as we go forward. So it is often asked, what is this business that we are engaged in? What's it all about? And the answer is, I know I use the example quite often, that when I was a grain trader, I started my career with Continental Grain Company back years ago, and my boss called me into his office at the end of 1 year for my 1-year annual review. And my boss asked me one important question. The vice president of our trading group said, "Jay, do you know what your job is?" And I smiled and I said, yes, I'm a grain trader. My job is to trade grain and make a profit. And he shook his head and he said, no. And I said, uh-oh, I don't have another answer. But all my life, I've remembered his response. His response is, your job is risk management. In other words, every day we come to our desk, whether we're a grain trader or whether we are a grain buyer or seller, and we have automatic risk. And our job is to minimize and control that risk as best we possibly can. So I think it's number one key point is to remember that our job is indeed risk management. So what is the job of most of the participants who are grain buyers? And your job, of course, is to manage and protect your processing margin. If you're a flour miller, your job is to protect the processing margin of the flour mill. If you're a feed manufacturer, your job is to protect the processing margin of a feed mill. If you're a trader, your job is to protect the risk in the market and try to eke out a profit in what you trade. And we can help manage that risk with the futures markets. The next question that often comes up is, who do the futures market mostly benefit? And the answer is everybody. Oftentimes people say, well, those crazy futures markets, they're just for the speculators. They're controlled by the speculators. And that's not true. It's not accurate. There are speculators, everybody from just general small speculators to large investment funds who are actively engaged in the futures market, and they do have an influence. But they're not the only players, and they don't control the market. Although they have temporary influences that help make the market go up or down, but they're necessary. If you want to examine it closely, and if you want to put it this way, you could say they're a necessary evil if you want, but they're necessary because they add liquidity. They add volume and liquidity to the markets, and that's an extremely critical, necessary element. So yes, we have speculators, but we also have farmers, grain traders, end users. Everybody is in there utilizing the futures market for their own purposes. So it's not just by any means. It is not just a tool of speculators. So how can we protect ourselves from price volatility, from price fluctuations? I often ask the question, what are you afraid of? And when we ask that question, the answer will depend on the situation. So if I ask one of you in the audience, what are you afraid of? If you are trying to buy wheat and you need to purchase your requirements for the next 6 months, and you have not yet covered your physical needs, you haven't yet contracted for that wheat, obviously your fear, your concern is what happens next week, next month, what happens to me if the price goes up between now and the time that I write a contract covering my physical needs. If you're a buyer though, and you say, I've already purchased cargo for the next 4 months, and I say, what are you afraid of? You would say, well, I've already signed a contract. I've already locked in a flat price. And I'm afraid that what if I made a decision too quickly and I paid too much and now the market might go down? That would be your concern. So we have different concerns or fears depending on whether we have covered our needs for the next 6 or 12 months or whether we have not. I want to emphasize, and it's really very, very important to do so as we have these discussions, that the futures market, I firmly believe with over 42, 43, going on 44 years of experience, the futures market is extremely important. It is critically important to utilize the futures market in your risk management program. Because if you don't manage risk, those people, those companies, those individuals who do not manage risk usually end up going out of business. And I am not exaggerating at all when I say that over 85% of the companies that I used to talk with when I first joined this business of grain trading, when I joined this industry with Continental Grain, I've gone through my contacts list and found that 85+% of the companies that I used to talk with and trade with no longer exist. They went out of business, or they merged. They merged or got purchased by somebody else. So it is a scary business. It is a business that contains considerable risk that we all must protect. And what we're going to find, I'm sure what you're finding, is those who protect their risk survive, and those that don't protect their risk well go out of business or get swallowed up by a competitor. That's the reality of our business. So this is a very important topic. This is something that we must be careful how we proceed. So again, There are a number of different strategies. There are a number of different approaches that we can all take if we are a grain buyer or a grain seller or just a trader. And the important thing to understand is that there's different strategies to fit different situations. This is not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So never, ever do something just because you see somebody else doing it. You don't know if their position is long or short. You don't know what they have covered or what they have not covered. You don't know why somebody else is doing what they're doing. Be very, very careful just to put your strategy together predicated on your needs, the needs of your company, not what somebody else is doing for whatever reason. Now, there is very true to say, do we need to hedge? And there's a situation that I say, if we could do profitable back-to-back trading every day, we would not need to hedge. There would be no need. Now, what is back-to-back trading? In very simplistic terms, back-to-back trading, flat price, is simply, I bought something today at $200 a ton, and I sold it later today or in the morning, in a quick period of time, I sold it for $205,000 a ton. Well, if you bought something for $200 a ton and sold it back to back quickly for $205, you're happy. You did not need to hedge. And you probably shouldn't hedge if you can do that consistently. If you can do that on a regular basis, day by day, week by week. If you can buy raw material, sell a finished product within 24 hours, and you can do it profitably, be happy. Don't worry about hedging. But the reality is, for the most part, that's a very rare, uncommon situation. Most of us have to buy grain, have to buy our wheat or other grains a month or two before we use them, a month or two before we process them, before we sell the finished product. So we always have what we would call time risk. I buy something today, I don't process it for a month or two, I don't sell the flour for 2 months. What happens between the price fluctuation in the market between the time I purchase my raw material and I sell my finished product? What happens between now and 6 months from now when I need to buy my needs going out through the balance of the year? I can't just back-to-back trade. I cannot put everything together quickly before the market changes and lock in a profit. So since we cannot do that commonly, then we need to hedge. Then we need to protect risk and protect that time risk when over the course of days and weeks and months, we have considerable market volatility. Of course, you're experiencing that right now. You've had a very big, very sharp increase in wheat prices over a short period of time. So again, that's what we are trying to protect against, that type of risk that will narrow or possibly eliminate our processing margins. That, again, is the key objective of what we are trying to protect, our trading margins or our processing margins. So I know that, I use the example of Egypt quite a bit. And I use the example of Egypt simply because I was fortunate enough when I was at IGP at Kansas State University, we had a group of GASC, the General Authority for Purchasing, the government authority that purchased wheat on behalf of the Egyptian government. And we had a delegation from GASC, from the wheat buying authority, come to Kansas. And they were sitting in the trading room on a particular day. And I mentioned to them that just 4 days prior to their arrival, they had had a wheat tender and they had purchased 4 cargoes of wheat. In this case, it was soft red winter wheat. And we were sitting there in the month of April, and they had purchased 4 cargoes for 2 cargoes for June and 2 cargoes for July shipment. Well, we were in April, so we had 2 to 3 months forward as they were purchasing. And I mentioned to the group, I said, you know, Egypt just purchased 4 cargoes of wheat for June and July shipment. And there were 3 companies, US exporters, who sold those cargoes. I said, do you realize something? None of those sellers, not one of those sellers has purchased a single bushel, a single ton of that wheat that they sold you for shipment in 3 months. And they were amazed. I said, those shippers don't own that wheat yet. They haven't purchased it yet. But yet they sold it to you flat price at today's market value. Now I know, as I say, how do I know that? Well, I happen to know that US soft red winter wheat farmers generally do not sell ahead of harvest. And harvest is in June and July. So I said, those wheat sellers will not be able to purchase that wheat until harvest. How can they possibly take and assume the price risk of what will happen over the next 3 months? Well, the answer is simple. They purchased soft red winter wheat futures on the Chicago Board of Trade to hedge themselves against that wheat price fluctuation. And this happens every day. When grain sellers sell to you cargoes of hard red winter wheat, soft red winter wheat, spring wheat for 3 and 4 months in advance, sometimes they own the wheat, sometimes they do not. They take that price risk, but they protect that price risk by purchasing futures in the futures market as a hedge, as an offset, as a protection against price volatility. And that's how they do it. And again, this is something that a grain buyer, somebody who purchases wheat, can do the opposite. You can protect yourself by purchasing wheat futures or futures options on the commodity exchange to protect your future price risk. So we'll move on now. Just simply to state here, risk is with us every day. We can't avoid it in this business. It is inherent. And so we can either manage that risk consciously, or we can sit at our desk and just take whatever comes down the road. But that's pretty dangerous. That's pretty risky. So what is a hedge? What is the definition of hedging? Well, hedging is simply an offset, an equal but opposite. You know, we point our fingers like this. Hedging is a temporary purchase or sale of a futures contract or a futures options contract as an offset against our cash, our physical grain needs. So if we were to say today, a flour mill in Chile needs to buy wheat for the next 6 months, but they have not covered all of their needs. Let's say they have covered 2 months of their requirements, but the next 4 months, the forward 4 months, are unpriced, uncontracted, uncovered. And that mill is nervous or concerned that the price might go higher. What can they do? They can purchase wheat futures today in an equivalent quantity. So if they wanted to buy 30,000 tons per month, they would buy 3 months. 3 times 30,000 would be 90,000 tons. They would purchase 90,000 tons of wheat futures as a hedge. That's one potential example. And they would hold on to that purchase of futures until such time that they purchase the cargoes that they were trying to protect. So one by one, if they purchased 30,000 in the physical market from a grain supplier and they flat priced it, they would get rid of the futures. They would sell them off, cargo by cargo, or ton quantity by ton quantity. They could do the same thing in the futures options market. They could buy a call, the right to call futures in the options market, again, using an equivalent quantity. And that would give them a hedge against prices going up. There are differences, of course, in Kansas City futures, Chicago soft wheat futures, Minneapolis spring wheat futures. So something that we have to be careful of, and you'll see me say this later, is a hedge is only a hedge if it fits. So you have to make sure that there is a correlation between the futures market and the physical market that you're trying to protect. So in general terms, now keep in mind the tough part of this job is that there's exceptions to almost everything we say. Things in this market are, nothing is 100% the same way all the time. But generally speaking, it's fair to say if you were going to buy hard red winter wheat, you would be looking at the Kansas City hard red winter wheat futures contract to use to hedge and protect your price risk. If you were buying soft red winter wheat, you would use the Chicago soft red winter wheat futures because that's where the closest correlation exists. If you were buying spring wheat, you would generally hedge in the Minneapolis spring wheat futures in order to match things up correctly. So we want to hedge where there is a proper and correct correlation to what we are trying to protect. I will say this, and we'll try to get into it a little more detail as we go forward. Whenever whenever an end user outside of the United States, although I use the same caution when we're inside, talking to users inside the United States, is whenever you are using futures, I think you know, there is a futures month for May. There is a futures month for July, etc. as we go forward. Well, if you look at the calendar today, we are in the month of May. So we are in the futures delivery month of May. If you have hedged in May, you should get out of that contract before you get to May 1st. Before you get to the first day of any futures delivery month, you should get the heck out of it. Because once you enter a futures month, by May 1, you're in the futures delivery month for May futures. Crazy, wacky, unimaginable things can happen when you get into the physical delivery month. If you have a futures position today in July futures, hang on to it But get out of it before July 1st, because come July 1st, you are in the futures delivery month. And again, those can get to be very crazy times. We have some examples of that coming up, but never hold on to a futures month once you enter the a futures position. Once you enter the delivery month, you're only asking for trouble if you hang in there longer. There is something called convergence, which means that in theory, the futures price and the physical price is supposed to converge. It is supposed to come together during that delivery month. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it does not. Again, it's a theory, and it does not always work because there's a number of other issues that come to affect that. I put this next slide up just so you can see, because we are going to start to talk about correlation. And this chart just gives a historical reference to where different correlations exist and how one commodity relates to the other. So when you look at the first line, corn, you'll see corn to corn is 100% correlation. If you look at the bottom, wheat to wheat is 100% correlation. But if you look at wheat to corn, or wheat to soybeans, or to crude oil, or other commodities, you'll see the correlation is not 1-to-1, which means simply that crude oil can act on its own. Crude oil can go up and down, as we have certainly seen this year, on its own fundamentals, on its own technicals. And it doesn't matter. Corn and wheat will not necessarily follow clean or 1-for-1 with crude oil, or with wheat will not move 1-for-1 against soybeans. One commodity can go up or down faster than another commodity. So you have to be careful if you're not hedging your needs in the right commodity in the right month, because you won't have a good correlation, and you need to have a good correlation. So this just, some people tell me, have said that, well, commodities follow crude oil. In my opinion, no, they don't. They do sometimes, and sometimes they don't. So be careful how you try to relate to one commodity versus another. Okay, we get now into that definition of what is a correlation. And a correlation, of course, is the relationship between the physical grain that we are trying to protect and the futures market that we are trying to use as a hedge, that we are trying to use as a protection. And if you go to a banker, if you go to most of the big financial auditing companies or others, what we call the textbook definition of a good or a accurate hedge is there must be a correlation of at least 80% or better. Now, some people have said, well, what if it's 75% correlation? Well, you go, 75% isn't bad, but 80% or better is the textbook definition of a proper hedge. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if I am trying to protect the price on hard red winter wheat, and I use the Kansas City hard red winter wheat futures as my hedge, I use that as my offset, then there should be an 80% correlation between the physical and the futures. Meaning that if the futures go up $1 a bushel, well, the physical price should adjust within 80% of that change. They should go up by 80 cents to $1 a bushel. Or you can use it a ton, a point of reference. It doesn't matter. It just means that the futures and the physical grain should move somewhat in tandem up and down, at least within a 80% correlation. So if you are hedging soft wheat or spring wheat and you use the appropriate futures market, if that futures market isn't moving up and down accordingly, then it's not a good hedge. It's not really protecting you. So you have to do a little homework. You have to do a bit of discussion with your futures broker, with your financial advisor. Does the Kansas City hard wheat futures, do they actually move more or less within an 80% variance, within a 20% variance? Do they move up and down relative to my prices delivered to Chile? If they do, wonderful. I can use that as a price risk tool. If the futures do not move up and down in a similar fashion with the physical prices delivered to Chile, then it's no good. Then I cannot use it. Certainly if it's less than 75% movement relationship or correlation, I should not be using it. Because then it's kind of apples versus oranges situation. Where does this correlation generally work? And where does it exist? And where is it generally, does it not exist? Generally speaking, these correlations are usually pretty good. Hard wheat to hard wheat futures to hard wheat physical, soft wheat futures, again, soft wheat, physical grain, wheat, generally are pretty good. That price in Chicago, that fluctuation you see versus the price you have to pay to your supplier should have a 75 or 80% or better relationship, correlation. Providing that we are dealing with a free, open market, a non-restricted market. So where does this not work? Well, it doesn't work in countries where there are government price controls. Because if a country has a government price control, then that has a negative impact on the futures market as far as the correlation, as far as the relationship, as far as the movement is concerned. The futures market is a world market. It is going to go up and down according to world conditions. If there's a drought in Russia, Chicago futures market will go up. If there is a drought in Brazil, as we're talking now, Brazil or Argentina, it will impact futures prices in Chicago. If there's a problem domestically in the United States, the futures price will move. But if there's government interference, if there's a government controls, that has a negative impact, and that's where you don't generally get a correlation. So I know I have talked to people in Indonesia. I've talked to people in other countries around the world that said you can't hedge. Your government has put import or price restrictions on, and that will spoil, that will negate that correlation, that will negate that hedge possibility. So you have to say, as long as I'm dealing in a free open market, as long as my market where I am purchasing the prices float freely along with the Chicago Board of Trade or the Minneapolis Board of Trade, then we're okay. Then we have a tool we can use. But if we get government interference, we can't. So I don't think that's such a big problem with the market in Chile. But just to make it clear, for anybody who may be dealing in other parts of the world, government interference can be an interference, can be an impediment to hedging. Okay, let's go back to talk about where should we hedge? Where can we get this correlation? Well, we already mentioned that we have a futures market in Chicago, the CME, Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Also, that purchased or merged with the Chicago Board of Trade. And we have soft red winter wheat futures. We have hard red winter wheat futures. We have corn and soybeans and other commodities. We have the Minneapolis Grain Exchange. And the Minneapolis Grain Exchange, among other commodities, trades spring wheat. We have a futures exchange in Argentina. We have the Buenos Aires Grain Exchange and the Rosario Grain Exchange. Can we use those as a hedge? Generally speaking, the answer is no. Well, why? Well, the answer is twofold. One, there's government restrictions that happen in Argentina. There's political influence in the grain price structure there that comes to play. And probably just as important, we don't have much liquidity. There is not a lot of trading activity in the Argentine exchanges. And something that's critically important is liquidity. Why is liquidity important? Because you, as someone who might use the futures exchange, you want the ability to turn on your computer, look at the computer screen and say, wow, the futures price today is $7. I want to put an order in to buy or sell at $7 per bushel in this case, because the futures are trading in bushel. But just to use an example, you want the ability to execute, to buy or sell at very near the price you see on your computer screen. You don't want to call your broker and say, okay, the futures are $7, buy some for me. And have your broker come back and say, well, I know you see that on the screen, but we can't execute at that level. You'd have to pay $7.05 or $7.10 if you really wanted to get an execution, if you really wanted to confirm a contract. You'd say, oh, that's crazy. No, I want to be able to buy and sell. I want to be able to get in and get out at a price very close to what I see on the computer screen, at a price very close to what I know to be the current market. And that takes liquidity. That takes lots of trading activity. And that trading volume allows you and me and everybody to put an order in to buy or sell and to get that order executed at very close to what you see on your computer screen. You will not get that possibility on exchanges around the world that don't have much liquidity. It's called, we joke in the trade, it's like the old rock and roll song, Hotel California. If you know the words to that song, one of the lyrics is, you can check in, but you can never check out. I've seen traders buy something and a week or a month later say, okay, I want to sell it, and not be able to get out. So you want liquidity. Get in quick, get out quick and easy at a price that is current and near the market that you see on the computer. Otherwise, it's no good. And so we have futures markets in China, Dalian Futures Exchange, along with others. but the Dalian is the most common. Dalian has a good liquidity. It didn't, 10 years ago, it did not, but in the last few years, the liquidity in Dalian has been very good. And you'll even see some US traders, if they're trading to China, use the Dalian exchange for corn or soybeans to China. You have the Life in London, England, and you have the, let's see if I move that too far. You have Life and you have Matif in Europe, now part of what's called Euronext, a combined exchange that combines the London and the Paris exchanges. And among other things, those exchanges trade wheat, and they trade European wheat, naturally. So people say, if I'm buying European wheat, could I use the London or the Matif futures markets as a hedge? And the answer is yes. You'll find the major international trading companies, if they're trading European wheat, they will use the Matif, the French Matif, to trade European wheat as a hedge, because there is good liquidity and because there's a correlation between that futures market and the European wheats. We have a Canadian exchange. Not many people use it, so it isn't very valid for trading, particularly for hedging. We have South African exchange, the SAFEX. You will see some traders using the SAFEX for South African maize. You have a newly formed, it's actually a newly reformed Moscow exchange in Russia. Not many people are using it. In this case, they tried it once, didn't work well a few years back. It's now been revised. They're trying to come up with a new trading exchange. But again, because of government interference with domestic prices and export taxes and export licenses, it causes a lot of difficulty to trade in the Russian exchange, as well as the difficulty in exchanging dollars or pesos for rubles. There are numerous exchanges in India. Not many people use them. Excuse me. So again, if you look at exchange, my purpose in going through these, there's one in Tokyo. It has very, very poor liquidity. So very, very poor execution potential. Not many people use it. You want to use an active, vibrant futures market that has liquidity. You can get in, you can get out at a moment's notice. Very important to understand that as you look at around the world. This is a chart that just shows trading volumes on the different exchanges. You'll actually see one of the most active exchanges is the soybean meal market in China on the Dalian. That has become very active, very busy. Soybeans, Chicago soybeans, corn. You'll see Chicago wheat. You'll see Kansas City wheat on that chart. But then you'll notice as you work your way down to the right on that chart, you'll get to other commodity exchanges. You'll get to other individual commodities where the exchange, the liquidity is not so good. It's just, you might want to think about it like going to the casino. You want to go where the action is. So that's how you want to relate to futures exchanges. So again, the important thing for us in this conversation is we're going to use the futures exchanges as a tool, not for speculative purposes. The Chicago Board of Trade years ago used to put out a statistic, and they stopped doing it because I think it was bad publicity. It was bad public relations. But they used to do a study, and they said that more than 80% of speculators lose. My experience in my years, and all the people I've known, a good number of speculators, I would have to say from personal experience, more than 90%, maybe more than 95% of speculators lose money. It's a fact. It is not much different than going to the casino in that regard. If you're going to speculate, you are gambling. And you may win today, you may win this week, but eventually you will give it all back and you will lose. And I could talk to you for a long time about all the people, professionals I have known, big traders who have gone bankrupt. So I agree that more than 80 or 90% of speculators lose money. And it just shows, it's evidence of how difficult it is to predict the future. You know, if you actually study speculators, particularly individual speculators, you'll find most of them will not outright buy or sell futures. They will not go what we call long or short outright. They will be what we call spread traders. They will buy one commodity, sell another, or buy 1 month in a commodity, sell another. And because the spread risk is much less than the straight outright risk of just buying wheat or selling wheat or buying corn and selling corn. So we want to use the futures as a risk management tool, not as speculation. Not to say, I just want to buy or sell futures and make extra money to help my company. High probability you'll be out of a job pretty soon. So be careful about that. We have that saying about hedging again. For every purchase, there must be a sale. For every sale, there must be a purchase. And I want you to think about that in terms of balance. We want to be balanced. So if I were to ask everyone on the program today who trades or buys grain, are you long or are you short? What is your position? And think about this as an airplane. Well, you see an airplane flying through the sky, and how does it look? Well, it obviously looks like both wings are level. The left wing and the right wing are straight across. You know, they are level. Actually, to protect risk, that's what you want to do. You want to be flying or trading level. So if I were to say to you, if I were to say to somebody, well, you have purchased 60,000 tons of wheat, but you have not sold any flour. Are you flying level or not? No, you'd be crooked. You'd say, I own a bunch of wheat, but I haven't sold the flour. I have risk. I'm tilted out of position. I am long wheat, have not sold the product yet. And I haven't sold futures. I have simply purchased wheat. If that was your situation, I would say then at this moment, what have you become? What are you? And the analysis would tell us you are a wheat trader. You're not a flour miller. You have become a wheat trader because you just simply own 60,000 tons of wheat and you haven't sold anything yet. You're long wheat. Long means I have purchased something that I haven't, and I have sold nothing. I have purchased more than I have sold. Well, I'm long 60,000 tons of wheat. I'm just a wheat trader. I'm kind of speculating. If the price goes up, I will pat myself on the back and be happy and say I made a good purchase. If the price goes down, I will say I'm sorry, I purchased too soon, I made a bad purchase, and I have narrowed my processing margin. So I'm not flying level. I have risk. Likewise, changing to a different scenario, if I would say, how much need do you have? How much requirement do you have for the next 6 months? And maybe you would say, oh, I need to buy 30,000 tons per month for 6 months. And I'd say, have you purchased that yet? And if you said no, if you responded no, I would say, then what is your position? Are you flying level or do you have risk? Well, in that example, we have to dig a little deeper. We have to ask some additional questions. If you have not purchased your wheat and you have not sold your flour, you are level. You have 0 purchases and 0 sales. You're okay. You're not at risk on price. But if you say, well, I have a contract with a customer, and that contract is for flour, and I have guaranteed that customer the same price. We have locked in the price of flour for the next 6 months. I am selling to a large bakery, and that bakery wants to buy 6 months at a time, and they want to lock in the price. So I have given them a commitment that I will sell them so many tons per month at so many dollars per ton. And I have locked in that price. But I have not purchased my wheat yet. Now in that example, are you flying level? No. You are short, meaning you have committed something on the sales side and you haven't purchased anything to cover against that. So you're short. You're short wheat. You cannot change the price on your sale of flour. And if the price of wheat goes down, again, you will pat yourself on the back and say, I made a good flour sale. The price of wheat went down and I made a good profit. I increased my processing margin. However, if the price of wheat goes up between today and when you need to purchase, you will not be so happy. You will say, I have narrowed my processing margin. I have damaged the processing margin because the price of wheat went up and I could not change the sale price of my flour. So you see how we look at, are you flying level? Are you balanced or not? That's how we look at things when we talk about risk management. No purchases, no sales, no problem. 30,000 tons of wheat purchased, 30,000 tons of wheat of flour sold, equivalent, no problem, no risk. But whenever we get out of balance, we have risk. And that is what we want to protect. So hedging is that temporary purchase of something to protect price risk. Now you say, I have sold flour for the next 6 months. Well, you can buy physical wheat today, lock in the price, and you have coverage. You're protected. But if you don't want to do that, you can buy futures and protect your price. Or you can buy a futures option in the futures market. You can buy what we call a call option, the right to buy futures through an option, and that will protect your price risk. And then you hang on to that until such time as you purchase your physical wheat, and then you unwind, you get rid of, you sell out the futures contract or the futures options contract that you no longer need. It's a temporary hedge. It's a temporary protection against price movement until you have completed the physical side of your purchase and your sale. I hope that makes sense, but again, just think about an airplane flying level, and you want both wings, the purchase and the sale side, to be even. If they're not even, you have price risk, and you need to do something to protect that price risk so it doesn't eat into your processing margins. So for every sale, there is a purchase, whether that purchase is in the physical grain market or whether that purchase is in the futures or options market. There's an offset. Every purchase has some type of sale. Every sale has some type of purchase to protect it. You know, the other thing that I know that people at this point sometimes are scratching their head and they are saying, yeah, do I really want to? Do I really need to do this? And again, the first boss I ever had said something to me, and I confess, when I first heard it, I thought it was silly. I didn't understand. I did not completely understand the importance of what he was saying. But he said, Jay, you will never go out of business. You will never go broke making a profit. I thought, yeah, that's a simple, obvious statement. You will never go out of business. You'll never go broke making a profit. But I've come to learn exactly what he was trying to say. In essence, what he was trying to say was, don't get greedy. Don't be too greedy. If you have a profit, in this case, a processing margin profit, lock it in. Go home. Sleep well. You will never go out of business making a profit, but you can and probably will go out of business speculating. So take too much risk, you're betting the company. So keep in mind that if we hedge, whenever we hedge, we create a relationship between the physical grain that we are hedging and the futures market that we are utilizing to provide the hedge. So I mentioned to you earlier that there is a Chicago and Kansas City wheat futures. And I mentioned to you that those two commodity exchanges, the prices go up and down with what's happening in the world, in the wheat world. Supply and demand, drought, too much rain, too little rain, and other issues that come into play. Those prices go up and down in Chicago relative to what the price should be in Chicago, or what the market believes the price should be in Chicago or in Kansas City. And we know that you're trying to create a relationship between that's at least 80% correlation or better to Chile, to the physical grain you are buying delivered to Chile. So you've established a relationship then. If you buy futures or options in Chicago or in Kansas City, you have automatically locked into a relationship between the futures market and your cash physical market. And that relationship is what we call the basis, B-A-S-I-S, the basis. Now you have to be careful because now sometimes you will hear different people describe this in different terms. It depends on who trained you. Being an old grain guy, I was trained, and most grain traders were trained, that we call this the basis. That relationship between the futures market and the physical market is the difference, is called the basis. Sometimes you will hear people say, well, I call it the premium. what is the premium? Well, you have to listen with a educated ear. Is somebody using the word premium to describe the basis? Maybe so. Or are they using that word to describe, well, what's the premium for 12% protein wheat over 11 protein wheat? That we also use the word premium. How much is the extra price for a 12% protein above the price of 11% protein? So you have to listen carefully with that educated ear of, if a person is using the word premium, are they talking about a protein premium? Are they talking about the premium that we paid for an option, which is the price we pay to purchase an option contract? Or are they talking about the basis? It can get confusing, and you have to be careful and listen carefully as to what's being discussed in the conversation. But for our conversation, we're going to call the basis, and that is that price difference between the two. So here is the
with COVID immunizations on the move, global markets are
somebody has some other
things to improve by at least by the second.
who has, okay, there you go. Thank you.
Well, with COVID immunizations,
Somebody has something playing in the background.
global markets are expecting things to improve by at least by the second half of 2020.
Somebody not muted?
And this should support higher freight rates, especially in the dry bulk.
Somebody is
I think
somebody's playing something that shouldn't be playing.
Well, with COVID immunizations on the move, global markets are expecting things to improve by at least by the second half of.
Just a minute, please. That's not mine. I don't have that up.
Support higher freight rates, especially in the dry bulk sector.
Excuse me a minute while I see how that, who's got that up, how that's playing.
And should see a softening or at least a leveling out of rates into the second quarter of 2021. Dry.
Excuse me just a moment, please. Okay, I hope we got rid of that.
Bulk, however,
okay, excuse me there. There's gentlemen, are you seeing the proper screen still? Somebody help me on that, please.
Yes, we are going, yeah, we are seeing the presentation, Jay.
Okay, let me make sure we're on the right spot. I'm not sure how that,
well, with COVID.
Damn it, excuse me. Don't know where that's coming from.
If you put the volume of your computer in
No, I don't, let me just check here. Huh. Well, let me go forward. If you're seeing the proper screen now, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I don't know, I apologize. I don't know where that came from. But we'll continue. we'll continue at any rate. As long as you have the right screen, I'm trying to get you back to you, the participants. Okay, well, the difference. I don't know where my screen went for the meeting. Excuse me one moment, please. There we go. Okay. If we're all up and good again, thank you. Sorry for that interruption. The definition, Oswaldo, are we okay, Oswaldo?
Yes, we can see your future plus basis slash.
Excellent, excellent, okay, thank you. So here is the official definition of basis. The official definition of basis is, and please remember so it doesn't get backwards, you always start with the cash. You always start with the physical price. So the physical is cash price minus the futures equals the basis. Cash price minus the futures equals that relationship between the futures market and the physical grain market that you're trying to purchase. So we're going to walk through that in just a minute, but don't get it. I've seen professors actually teach it backwards. So I'm always cautious. Start with a physical market and subtract the futures. And the difference is that relationship. And the relationship is the basis. So as we go to the next slide, here's some examples of how we would calculate, how we would look at basis. So in this, just to make the mathematics easy, I used round numbers. Let's say that the hard red winter wheat futures in Kansas City, so on the Chicago Board of Trade, the Kansas City wheat futures today, we will say, are trading at $7 per bushel. Now, don't be afraid. Don't be scared by the fact that we're saying bushel. It's just a point of measurement. You can say, yes, I know that $7 a bushel is equivalent to $257.20 per metric ton. But we'll start with bushels because the futures market trades in bushels. So Chicago futures are trading at $7 a bushel. If we use the example that hard red winter wheat today at the Texas Gulf, FOB Houston, Texas, if FOB, free on board vessel, Houston, Texas, what if it's trading at $8.20 per bushel? We would start with the cash price, $8.20. We would subtract the futures, which at the moment we are saying would be at $7. What would the difference be? Well, we would say the cash physical market is trading at $1.20 per bushel over or higher than the futures market. So we would say the basis at Houston, Texas today, using this example, is 120 over the futures. And in this case, we're looking at new crop corn, July. So we'd say July corn is trading at a basis of 120 over the futures, over the July futures. If you want to look at it in metric ton, I've put that conversion on the screen for you. So you would say it's just over $301 physical at Houston, Texas. And when you subtract 257 from 301, you get a basis of about $44 a metric ton over the futures. So there's the basis. Cash minus futures equals the difference, or the basis relationship. What if we say, where is wheat trading to a farmer? What are the grain elevators in Kansas paying to the farmer? Well, if we said, the farmer is getting $7 a bushel today. And where are the futures? The futures are at $7. So what's that basis? What's that relationship? Well, it's zero, the same. So the basis, we would say in this example, in Kansas, is zero, or we would actually say option price. It is the same as the futures option, or zero basis. Excuse me, that's not a farmer, that's a flour mill. Excuse me, I misspoke on that. A flour mill. If we said a farmer in Kansas is getting $6.80, how does that relate to the prevailing futures market? I would say cash is $6.80. The physical market is $6.80. Futures are $7. What's the basis? And as you look to the right, you see the basis is -20. -20. So the farmer in this example is getting 20 cents per bushel, or just over $7 a ton less than the futures market at the current moment. Okay, that's the relationship. Be very, very careful how you think about this. Be careful how you relate to this, because we want to be clear. Does the basis itself tell us anything about profit or loss? The answer is no. The fact that the farmer is getting 20 under the futures, that the farmer basis is -20, does that mean the farmer is losing money? No. It just means, as a point of reference, the farmer is getting $6.80 a bushel for his wheat, and that happens to have a relationship to the futures of -20. So futures basis can be negative or positive. And it often is, although an export market is most always a positive. By the time you get it down to Houston, Texas, or New Orleans and put it on a ship, it's 99% of the time, not 100%, but 99% of the time, it's a positive number. I have seen soft wheat many years ago trade at a negative, but it didn't mean anything about profit or loss. It was just a relationship to the futures. Now, if you buy something at 120 over, going back to that first example, if you buy something, if I'm an exporter and I buy something at 120 over and sell it a week later at 125 over, can I say if I've made a profit or not? Yes. I can say I bought something, I purchased something at a basis of 120, and I sold it later at 125. I made 5 cents per bushel. But only when I compare the basis at which I purchased to the basis at which I sold can I determine if I made a profit or loss. If I purchase something today at 120 over FOB vessel, and I sell it a week from now at 110, did I make money or lose money? I lost money. I purchased something at 120 over the futures, and I later sold it at 110 over the futures. I lost 10 cents a bushel. Now, when I compare the two, and 110 sounds like a big number, but I still lost money because I sold something cheaper than I had purchased it. So we have to look at basis in that way. We only know profitability or lack of profitability when we compare purchase and sale basis, the beginning and the end result together. So there's an example again of how we calculate basis, how we think about basis. For you in Chile, and this is something I want you to be careful about, this is something I want you to think very clearly about. We also have to say, well, I am a wheat buyer in Chile. what happens if I pick up the telephone today, I call my supplier, and I'm just going to use the numbers on this screen as an example. It doesn't mean that it's the perfect, accurate assessment of today's market. But using this example, what happens if you pick up the telephone today and you call your supplier and you say, I want to buy a cargo of wheat. What's the price? And if we look at this chart and the export company says to you, well, the price is $301 per metric ton FOB vessel. Yes, you'd have to add the ocean freight to that, but let's just use the FOB FOB vessel value at Houston, Texas as a point of reference. So then you would have to make a decision. Do I want to buy that price or not? And we will use the example. Let's say you say, yes, I will take it. I will buy it. The seller sells to you, you write a contract, a purchase contract for $301 per ton. You're done. You're locked into the price. You've bought the cargo. Your cost now is $301 a ton, FOB, Houston, Texas. You know the end final price of your wheat, plus the ocean freight, of course. Ocean freight right now to Chile is something close to $45 a ton. So if it's 301 FOB and we add the appropriate ocean freight, it is $346 a ton delivered to Chile. But you say, okay, I'm willing to buy that. You have now locked in that price. But is there another way? And you know that most sellers will say to you, I am happy to sell to you today at the prevailing flat price, or I will sell to you on the basis. So you have the possibility of purchasing today at $301 a ton FOB, or alternatively at 120 over basis. Which do you choose? Which, if either of them, do you wish to accept? You would have to think about this, and you would have to say, I'm bearish. I think today's prices are too high. I think the futures market next week is going to go down. So I don't want to lock in the price today, but I do want to write a contract to purchase the wheat. So I will buy the basis. I will buy 120 over FOB Houston for shipment in July. And I will have, by doing that, I will have between today and July 1, the 1st of July, to fix or to set the price of the futures. Because every price has two components. Futures and basis equals price, flat price. So if you have done that, and I'm going to go to the, if you have bought the basis from me, the seller, and you purchased 120 over, what have you done? What have you accomplished? Well, you have locked in the basis. You have a firm contract commitment from the seller. You have actually purchased the full cargo of wheat, but you haven't yet fixed the futures component. So what does that mean? It means you have futures price risk. I am going to give you the option, the possibility, to call me on the telephone at any time between today and the July 1 and set the price of the prevailing futures at that time. So if the futures today are $7, but we have locked in only a basis contract, a sale of 120 over. And you call me in 1 month and you say, Jay, I've been looking at my computer screen and the Kansas City hard wheat July futures have come down. They're no longer at $7. They are at $6.50. And I want, you want to price them now at $6.50. I would say, okay, fine, no problem. We will go in and buy the futures. This is a month from today. At that time, we go in and we purchase the futures at $6.50. Then what is the price of your cargo? Your price of the cargo is $6.50 futures plus $1.20 basis equals the flat price. So $6.50 is going to be $7.70. So you would say, the futures went down. I locked in the basis earlier when we first spoke, and now I'm fixing the futures at a lower value. But if the futures happen to have gone in the other direction between today and a month from now, or 2 months from now, your basis of 120 over would be used to calculate with that higher futures. So if futures go to $9 a bushel, your contract will be 120 over, 120 cents per bushel over $9 futures. You would be paying more. So you would be speculating. You'd be taking a risk on anytime you purchase a basis contract, you are accepting futures price risk. And you just have to understand that. I know that's a lot to consider, but try to take that in. I haven't.
COVID immunizations.
What the heck is that? Where that keeps coming from? This is a corn chart. I apologize, it's corn, but I use it because it's a simple, easy chart and it's easy to explain things. Take a look, and I told you a moment ago, and accurately so, that there's two components to every price. All around the world, there's two components. Futures plus basis equals flat price. So what you see here is the blue on that chart represents the futures. The red on that chart represents the basis. And when you look at that, you obviously see that the futures are the biggest component of price. Futures, generally speaking, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, futures are 75 to 80% of a component that represents 75 to 80% of a flat price. So if you're paying $350 a ton for wheat, 75 or 80% of that price is represented by the futures market, and maybe 20% or so of that is represented by basis. So whenever you buy a basis only contract without fixing the flat price, you take a lot of futures risk. You are shouldering a lot of futures risk. 75 or 80% of the resulting flat price that you are going to fix at a later date is represented by futures movement. So always be careful of that. Please, please keep that chart in your head, whether you're talking wheat or corn or soybeans, the same. Most of the risk is flat price is futures. Little bit of the risk is basis. So the definition of basis, cash price minus futures equals basis. Definition of cash price, physical cash price. Physical price is futures plus basis equals flat price.
Well, with
So again, I mentioned to you before, and we'll just take one step deeper into this, is you want to hedge in the futures market that gives you the highest, the best, the most appropriate correlation. The one that's going to move up and down the futures market relative to your physical cash prices, your physical grain prices. So you not only want to use the right futures, for instance, the Kansas City Board of Trade, the Chicago Board of Trade, Kansas City futures, but you want to use the right futures month. So I'm going to skip forward for just a minute, and then we'll come back if you'll there. Excuse me, I should have put some.
well, with COVID immunization.
Where does that keep coming from? These are the futures months for each commodity. Corn and wheat, there's a futures month in Chicago or Kansas City market for March. It's represented by H. The letter H is representative of March. There's a May, a July, a September, and a December. So you want to, we are sitting here, of course, in the month of May. You want to buy new crop wheat for June and July, hard wheat. What futures have the best correlation? Well, we would go to the Kansas City market because it's hard wheat. We would go to the July futures because we want June, July wheat. And July has the best correlation to what the market expects to happen in that time frame. Using a separate example, you want to buy wheat for next October. Oh, what futures should you use as a hedge? What futures should you use for protection? Well, we're always looking forward. The market is always looking forward, never looking backwards. So if we wanted to protect October prices, we would use the December futures, because the December futures are representing what the market thinks is going to happen in October, November, and December of this year. So we want to always focus and utilize the proper exchange, the proper futures, and the proper futures month that has that correlation. If I was buying June, July wheat cargoes today, and I used the December futures, I wouldn't get that 80% correlation, and that is not desirable. So again, if you're doing soybeans or soybean meal, they have different futures months, some the same, some different. But wheat is that March, May, July, September, December futures contracts that can be utilized and options against those contracts. This is the example I give as to why you never, ever, ever want to stay in a futures market when you get to the delivery month. So we're in May. You should be all the way away from the May. You should not be involved in it. No purchases, no sales in the futures market in May. When we get to July, you don't want to have any open positions in July futures. Here's a good example of that. It goes back to 2008, but it's something that is famous or infamous, and well spoken about in our trading environment. And I identified Bunge because everybody knows it was Bunge who got caught. When you get into a delivery month of a futures, you lose liquidity. The number of players, the number of people who are playing in that future in that futures month, in that particular month, diminishes greatly. And when the number of people playing in that futures diminishes, you lose liquidity. You can't get in and out quickly or easily. And in 2008, the Bunge spring wheat trader found that out in a very difficult lesson. This is what happened. Minneapolis spring wheat futures, March futures, went from $8 a bushel up to $25 a bushel before that trader could get out, before he could execute a buy order. So this is like that Hotel California. You can get in, but you can't get out. He had purchased that, he had sold the wheat at the equivalent of about $294 a ton, if we want to convert from bushel to ton. And before he could get out, it went to 330, and then eventually all the way up. Look at that. There were very large losses incurred. This is what we call a squeeze play. Somebody was on the other side of this, and it literally got down to where there were only two players, one buyer, one seller. Bunge was the buyer. He was negotiating with a single seller. Liquidity had dropped that low, and that one seller squeezed the life out of that trader financially. That Bunge trader was calling every day and said, "Let me out. What's your price?" And the seller was saying, "Not today." He couldn't execute an order for weeks. And that's what happened to the market. You don't want to now, it's not always that crazy, thank goodness. But there are squeeze plays that take place on a regular basis. Look at the crude oil market earlier this year. That was a squeeze play. So you don't want to be in the delivery month when you get there. Get out. Just shows again the volatility that we've had. You know that what wheat rates have been doing, and you know that the objective that we are all trying to accomplish is to protect price risk, to protect processing margins.
Well,
We looked at that already, so we're going to skip over it.
well, with
The other thing I want to emphasize when we talk about hedging, I've talked to you about you can buy flat price, you can buy $300 or $350 a ton, whatever the prevailing market might be. You can buy basis and play whether, speculate a bit and play whether the market is going to go up or down. You can purchase an option contract, which personally I think is probably one of the best strategies for a flour miller to protect against future movement in price, against future volatility. Buy a call option, pay the premium, hold that call option as your insurance policy. Hold that call option as your protection until you purchase the physical grain, and then get rid of the option, sell it out. That probably is your one of your best strategies for protecting price risk. But if you, once you decide to engage in futures trading, futures or options trading, I caution you to be careful of it in this way. Let me see if I can skip and come back to this. I'm going to skip because I want to explain this first. The J. O'Neill first principle of risk management is, if you don't understand it, don't do it. Second principle of risk management is, keep in mind that the objective is to control, to minimize price risk, not to add extra price risk. to the situation that already exists. So you are sitting at your desk today with price risk. Prices over the next few months may go up or down, and you're at risk at what happens. But only do what you know and understand, because if you're getting involved in something you don't understand, you're likely to cause more trouble than what you have to start with. So if you don't understand it, don't do it. Talk to your futures broker, get educated on how to trade futures, how to trade options, how to manage those. And then they can be very, very good risk management tools. But a tool is only useful if you know how to use it. If you don't know how to use a tool, you can hurt yourself. And that's my message to you. So let's just go by one other thing as we start to wrap up. Do not engage in futures trading or futures options trading, A, if you don't understand it, B, if you cannot do proper accounting for it. So you must not, you might say, well, I'm the grain buyer and I understand futures and I understand options. So I'm not afraid to engage in utilizing those tools. That's good. Do you have an accounting department who can do proper accounting of what you're buying, what you're selling every day? Does your management understand? I remember back when I was trading grain at 2 flour mills, and we had a morning meeting with a large flour miller in the United States. And we talked to that miller about using call options to protect his price. And we had a very good conversation. And the purchasing manager understood. But at the conclusion of our discussions, we asked the purchasing manager, well, what do you think? And the purchasing manager gave us a very, very good answer. He looked at us and he said, we were the sellers of the wheat. He was the flour milling buyer. And he said, this is all very interesting and it's all very good. And I think my company should use it, but I'm not going to engage in it. And we said, why? And his answer was, because the owner of my company does not understand these. And until the owner of my company understands these, I'm not going to do it. And that was a brilliant answer, because that trader was saying, I might trade with futures or options. I might be successful. But if my boss doesn't understand what I'm doing, if the boss doesn't also understand it, it's not going to look good. It's not going to come out well. So not only must I know how to do this, but so must my boss. So that was also something I think is important for all grain buyers around the world, is the trader, the purchasing manager must understand it, but so should upper management understand it. You also must have an accounting department that can keep control of it, because you need to know, as the purchasing manager, how many futures do I own? How many futures do I sell? How many options do I own? What's the price of those options? Accounting must be able to keep records of that. Otherwise, you will get in big trouble. And I use as an extreme, but it's a real example, rogue traders. In 1995, Dawa Bank out of Japan had a trader lose $1 billion in the bond market. He was trading bond options. Nobody was obviously watching what that trader did. He lost $1 billion. 1995, a very famous rogue trader, Nick Leeson of Baring Bank. Now keep in mind, Baring Bank in Singapore was over 100-year-old bank. One of these old well-known, rock-solid banks in Singapore that everybody trusted. And Nick Leeson was a trader for them, and he lost $1.3 billion trading in the futures market. He wasn't hedging, he was speculating, trying to make a lot of extra money and make himself look good as a trader. Barings Bank, over 100, I think over 120 or over 130-year-old bank, went out of business. They did not have proper controls to watch their trader. So shame on Nick and the terrible thing he did to bankrupt the bank, but shame on the bank for not having controls in place to watch him. Sumitomo, 2.6 billion loss in the copper futures market. Jerome Knievel here at SocGen. You probably know SocGen. I think it's the third or fourth largest bank in France. $7.2 billion loss by Jerome Caraval, futures trader. They obviously didn't have good futures control, risk management. They had somebody trading in the futures market and nobody was watching what that person was doing. And then again, we can go on. 2011, UBS, United Swiss Bank, lost 2.3 billion from one of their traders. And somebody didn't have internal controls, didn't have a second set of eyes watching what was going on. This is 2007, again, another hedger. Every few years, you'll read in the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times some story about some company. We've seen it in even large financial institutions losing a bunch of money because they weren't watching and they didn't have internal controls. I know you're not going to trade $1 billion in the futures market, but you probably will trade equivalent of million. You know what a wheat cargo costs today. So you're going to be talking in the millions of dollars of risk. Make sure you have internal controls. Make sure you have management understanding. Make sure you have a second set of eyes daily watching the activity and making sure everything is good. We'll skip the Hunt brothers. We don't need to talk about that. Just to remind you on the principles of risk management, I think it's a good and useful tool. I want to be clear. I think grain buyers around the world should definitely engage in using futures and futures options in their risk management strategy. I think if they don't use the futures or options in their risk management strategy, they're going to be sorry, but they have to understand how to use those tools. So become educated, get better knowledge than I'm able to give you here today on this simple webinar. But if you learn and if you watch, you'll find the tools to be very useful and very helpful. Just have to control them. And again, using futures and options does not protect you against basis change, does not protect you against ocean freight fluctuations, does not protect you against foreign exchange, the difference in the foreign exchange between your currency and the US dollar. So you have to address those separately.
With COVID immunization.
So it does not have to be as complicated as you see here. You don't have to have that many computer screens to follow the market, but you do need to watch the futures market daily and have somebody else in management doing the same. For that, I think I've taken a lot of your time. I'll stop here and give you time for questions if you wish.
Thank you very much, Jay. Muchas gracias, Jay, por la excelente presentación.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation.
Excellent presentation. A continuación, vamos a recibir las preguntas que tengan. Independiente del idioma, nosotros vamos a apoyar en la traducción.
We will help with translation.
Recuerden que para activar
Remember that to
su
activate
micrófono,
your
para poder hacer
microphone
las preguntas
to be able
pertinentes.
to do the questions accordingly.